The person who has the very great honour of our opening keynote from formerly the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, Nicki Green, recently shifted to a small farm between Thames and Paeroa. She has joined the Thames Coromandel District Council as their strategy and district planning team leader. She was formerly with the team at Toi Moana Bay of Plenty Regional Council. 9 years as Principal Policy Advisor, leading the work program to implement the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. It is with huge pleasure that I welcome our first keynote speaker to the stage, Haumai Te Pakipaki, Nicki Green. Kia ora, Nicki. Do you need that? Why is this on an angle? Sorry. That's better, because everyone's flowed over there.
That's how you like it?
Is that good for you?
Yes, it's good for me, thank you. No pressure. First up, goodness. Kia ora. Ko Waiheke te motu, ko Hauraki Gulf te kapa moana te moana, ko Nicki Green tōku ingoa. I grew up on Waiheke. I've been working in the Bay of Plenty with Bay of Plenty Regional Council for 9.5 years, and for 2 weeks I have now been working with Thames Coromandel District Council. And I'm at that age where I have to take my glasses off to look at you and put them back on to look at this, so bear with me. Just listening to the welcome and talking about water bodies, I thought I'd just give you a little story that we have just recently shifted to 10-hectare property, beautiful property between Thames and Paeroa, Upper Valley. We've shifted next door to some long-finned eels that have been there for at least 40 years and their ancestors for thousands of years. The stream's right on our boundary. In a heavy rainfall event like Gabriel, it comes across our farm. And I have been quite personally astounded by how connected you suddenly become when you're right there with a stream next to you, life living in it that is native, native bush all around. You're making decisions every day about which animals live and which die, which is a big responsibility when you're talking about pest animals and your farmed animals. And so I guess a message from that is all of you make decisions in your work. You may not be able to see it so directly, but you affect life in your decisions. And when I think it's really good to keep that present in your mind as you work through what you do in stormwater management and freshwater management. I don't know actually how to use this, but we'll give it a go. So when I was asked to present, I was working for Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and they have thankfully said, yes, keep going ahead. So this is a Bay of Plenty-centric presentation for you. And now I'm working at Thames Coromandel District Council, and I thank them for giving me the day to come and do this. So, glasses back on again. What should we talk about today? Some of you will remember that in 2021 I did a presentation for you, and I was thinking maybe if there's lots of you that didn't come, I could just do the same presentation again. But I think there are quite a few of you that did come, so you'll see some, if you've got an elephant-like memory, you'll remember a few slides. But I gave you a whistle-stop tour of water quality, maybe water quantity issues in the region, and we can look at what's happened since then. I'm offering you my perspectives as a policy person. I'm actually quite impressed you asked a policy person back, but and shaped by working in implementing the National Policy Statement for Freshwater for a while, and also advising for Te Urukahika, the regional sector, on RM reforms. So it's my views, my thinking, but I don't think there'd be anything that Bay of Plenty or Thames Coromandel would disagree with, or I think there's no conflict there. So this was one of my first slides in 2021. We're still there. Reform, social change, context changed, This was post-COVID in 2021, quite a different international situation now. This was also in 2021, and here we are in 2025, and we're going through Three Waters reform. We're heading for major resource management reform. Māori rights and interests and te tiriti relationships are a hot topic. Climate change adaptation and response still on the table nationally. Local government reform on the horizon. Big changes for infrastructure providers, Public Works Act changes, designations, fast track sort of things occurring. They directly affect most of what you do, most of what I've been doing. And this has been going on for some time, but my hasn't. The political pendulum swung. So now we're here going for growth in housing, simplification, efficiency, productivity, enable farmers to farm. Do you remember back in 2020, 2021, Minister Parker was saying, get that NPS implemented, fix freshwater problems, telling regional councils they hadn't delivered and they needed to. So the political context has changed a lot. And I guess a question for you and a message, I would hope that you play the long game. You know the issues, you know the difficulties of resolving them between use and water quality and so forth. Keep an eye on those long-term matters as you're working through this changing environment. So the Bay of Plenty, what's happened since 2021? Some of these slides will be familiar. So just if you're wondering where the Bay of Plenty starts and finishes, over to the west there, sort of from Waihi Beach, not Waihi Town, through to the east at Lotton Point. And to the south, the Rangitaiki River is the big catchment in the middle there, which has the Central North Island iwi holdings land and has the large forestry all the way back to the Napier Taupo Highway. There are still 9 large rivers and many small rivers and medium rivers, many discharging to estuary harbours and coastline. They're still there. There are still remaining wetlands, maybe only 5 to 10% of original, some with really special values. And there are still these large groundwater systems in the Bay of Plenty. It really is the Bay of Plenty when it comes to groundwater. This is interesting. I just heard from the Mayor that there are 16 Rotorua lakes. We've been talking about the 13 large Rotorua Te Arawa lakes for some time, so we're going to start looking and making sure we've got our numbers lined up there and that we've got those other 3 lakes on the list. But there are actually more than 100 small lakes or wetlands in the Bay of Plenty, but mostly we hear about these beautiful Rotorua Te Arawa lakes that you're here in the catchment of today. So the rivers, the lakes, the wetlands, the groundwater systems, the sensitive coastal receiving environments, Tauranga, Ohiwa Harbour, Waihi, Makatu, Waiatahi, they're all still there. Culturally, there's still and always will be this deep, rich, diverse Māori culture and heritage in this region, strongly affiliated with freshwater bodies. There are now 4 co-governance bodies established as a result of treaty settlements, and more will follow. 38% of the land is Māori-owned in the Bay of Plenty. There are more than 37 iwi, 260 hapu, 225 4 or 5 marae. There are still these really important values and uses in the region. There's a lot of beautiful swimming spots in this region. There is still traditional mahinga kai gathering. So I'm labouring this point because these slides were in the last presentation, and this one here, land use, is back to 2016-17. But the point here is that we have quite a, when you look at land use, we've got a lot of forestry through that central area, a lot of native forest out to the east coast and up in the Kaimai Ranges and so forth. We've got dairy and kiwi fruit across those lowlands and some sheep and beef. And some growing towns and cities, some shrinking small rural areas that really will struggle to pay for some of the things that need to happen. That hasn't changed that much. There's been a little bit of change, but it hasn't changed that much with these political swings. And those tensions are still there, the tensions between land use and their effect, water use and their effect. And so when we look at what we've been doing about that, we've been working away, we've developed, in a simple sense, do we need to make a small, a moderate or a large reduction in the loads of the key contaminants, sediment, nitrogen, phosphorus, E. coli, from these catchments? And that started to frame what is the policy response for those catchments. In the Bay of Plenty, a lot of those issues are rurally driven. They're from the land uses. I guess there are some key point source discharges that are being managed as well, but by and large this is a large catchment scale diffuse source issue. When it comes to water quantity, I've had a lot of work done with some consultancies and with some modelling across time. We know that we've got those heavily spring-fed streams through that yellow area in the middle. We've come to find that there may be able to be more water made available through some parts of the catchment and of the region and less in some other parts. And so we're getting to those hard questions of how do we manage through that. So what do we do with this material now that we've developed and started to look at these issues? We've started at a high level to look through what the options are. There are limited tools available for those options. This is when we get into a little bit of a, I guess, a bit of a cycle that's been a bit difficult. So the National Policy Statement for Freshwater has been what I would call unstable. Every 3 years it's been changing, and it's about to change again. So we've worked through that vision and values and outcomes. We've had community engagement. We've worked on attributes, targets. We've started to look at what are the options to manage those. We've got draft plan change material. However, when the policy statement changes every 3 years, we've got a problem because our processes to implement them take longer than 3 years. And so every time those changes come, we have to change programs. This is a familiar story to a lot of you, I'm sure. It's the same with Three Waters. You've spent huge amounts of effort to align to one way, and then it changes and you've got to spend huge amounts of effort to realign to another way. So I hope we get stability out of this process that's coming. So this project in the Bay of Plenty has been going for quite some time. 2012 we began in just 2 catchments. There have been timeframe amendments. There have been resets of programs to get to where we're going. In this list, and I don't expect you to read it all, but you'll see that there was a water quantity plan change notified, went through to submissions and hearings, and then it was withdrawn. And that was in part because of the promise of it being dealt with more holistically and in an integrated way through the planning process under the NPS for freshwater. We did see the Rotorua plan change complete. So that started before the NPS for freshwater existed, and it became operative in 2022. So this is the catchment you're in here, Lake Rotorua catchment. There are nitrogen rules here with the use of overseer through the rules. Farmers and other parties that discharge nitrogen have budgets that they need to meet. there are other parts to that integrated framework as well to bring nitrogen down for Lake Rotorua. I'm not sure if you're aware that that lake and a few other lakes are dosed with alum regularly, and that's to drop phosphorus out of the water so that phosphorus can't buddy up with its mate nitrogen and cause algal blooms. It would be nice to be able to stop doing that across time. It's a little way away, but in the meantime, there's a lot of people doing a lot of work in these catchments to bring their nitrogen down. So most recently, our councillors had that really difficult decision of what to do in the face of the NPS for freshwater. I'm saying our councillors, I'm talking about Bay of Plenty, I'm still thinking with the Bay of Plenty hat on. They had to weigh up the issues we were facing and wanting to address, the fact that there's a whole lot of water quantity consents expiring shortly, and it would be good to have some new rule sets in place, with the uncertainties of national policy changing and what to do about that. And ultimately they decided they would wait. So no release of the draft plan change, no progression to notifying just yet, while we wait for the national policy statement for freshwater to land, which was meant to be around mid-year. With that delaying to later in the year, hot on its heels will be the resource management reforms. And so if I crystal ball gaze, and it's my own crystal ball, I would suggest that that won't progress now until after the RM reforms. It's a little bit of I'm not wanting this to be a real downer in your keynote speech, but I guess it's the unseen churn and cost. It's seen by all of you, you're working in the space, but it's the cost of flip-flopping at a national level. And some of what our plan change is trying to do would meet some of what the government's trying to achieve. So it's counterproductive as well, because some of it would have been a simpler plan, a more straightforward process and so forth. On the upside, by the time it does get notified, hopefully there's a simpler planning process that includes people properly but is more straightforward. So just bringing that, I guess, to light. But let's look at what's happening in the meantime, because it's not all sad. On the upside, in focus catchments, Bay of Plenty's always been really strong in non-statutory work with farmers and groups. And in that period of time after COVID, when the government was popping money into Jobs for Nature, Freshwater Improvement Fund, Billion Trees program and so forth, quite a lot came into the Bay. And there are a lot of farms that have farm programs now and that have fencing and planting and advice on biodiversity and pest management and so on. There are also community groups that formed, and let's just look at Waihi Estuary. I can't cover the whole Bay of Plenty at once, but in 2021 I presented about Waihi Estuary, which is a little one next to Makatu, and it's one that's got some of the most significant issues in our region, and it's impacted by nitrogen sediment E. coli from the catchment, and I guess the drainage networks that were installed a long time ago, as well as the farming practices. So there's a Tangata Whenua partnership with Regional Council and with funding nationally. So this is the Te Wahapu o Waihi Iwi Collective. Purchased farm at the bottom of the catchment. There's 30 hectares going back into wetland down there that we hope through the modelling and work will help with treating some water before it ends up in the estuary. There's also excellent landowner projects occurring. So the one on the left is with Bay Gold. You can see it from the state highway, and the one on the right, I think you can also see that from the state highway on your way between Tauranga and Whakatane, which these are partnerships with NIWA involved with the design and the monitoring of these treatment wetlands for sub-catchments, and they're really beautiful. People pull off the road and go to Bay Gold and ask, what are you doing? How have you done that? Can we do it too? What does it take? It's a little bit of a gold-plated version, and some of the work going on now is how do we bring down the cost but still achieve the outcome outcomes. So there's some really excellent partnerships. The results of what this is stripping out of the water in the way of sediment, phosphorus, nitrogen, E. coli is really great, really promising. And I think one of the things we are starting to hear is that the government's probably looking to putting some money back into catchment scale or sub-catchment scale projects with farms. So what's coming next? What's coming next? Well, I understand this is still the timeline, so we might expect that a national direction package might be gazetted in about October this year, and that will include, we hope, the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water. And then by mid next year, we're still hearing that the RM reforms, the actual acts, will be enacted, and we haven't seen the bills yet, which are supposed to come out late this year. So that's pretty ambitious. But those processes should, the government's still aiming to deliver them within that next year. What are we hearing about those two acts? It's still pretty high level, actually, that we will, instead of the RMA, we'll have a Natural Environment Act and a National Planning Act, and a bit of separation between environmental management, largely that regional council set of functions from the I guess the infrastructure and urban development part of things, which you could argue is largely the district council functions, which raises some questions. But this focus on clearer national policy direction set, possibly more rules and things set at the national level, like zones and rules, narrower scope for what we call environmental effects, simplifying, systemising the system and planning processes. This concept of a principle of protecting property rights, which really needs our eyeballs on it when it comes out. There's a concept of regulatory takings, that if it's deemed that rules are, I guess, having a large impact on property rights, that there might have to be some compensation, which is a little bit of a concern if it's reasonable regulation, and that line between, I guess, protecting property rights versus effects beyond the boundary, but also providing for future generations. There's a lot of questions in there I can't go into right now, but things to keep watching for. And so we know that there's this focus on environmental limits and special area protections and enabling use within that. Those of you that have been involved in the setting of environmental limits for quality or quantity or anything else know that that's really challenging. Can't pull rabbits out of hats, but the concept that we'll have this set of limits for natural resources and then we'll enable use within it is the conceptual view, but I think we're really going to have to look at the detail of the how, and a stronger focus on more permitted activities with clear conditions, and then more focus on compliance monitoring and enforcement. There's still that discussion about whether that compliance monitoring enforcement body will be national or stay with the council. So there's a lot of change coming and there's a lot of uncertainty. So we don't know what will replace the treaty principles. We don't know yet how those two acts will integrate, because really it's the nexus between development, infrastructure and environment that we need to manage most. So they need to be integrated. Not clear entirely about plan-making processes, particularly when it comes to combined planning processes with districts and regions. I've mentioned regulatory takings and compliance monitoring, enforcement and limits. And the timing and sequencing element, we're hearing that there's a desire for that transition to occur quickly, so that when the RM reforms come into place, we'll be jumping on board spatial planning very quickly, followed by the regional and district planning parts, and that the national planning framework will be coming through really quickly. So there's a lot of change coming. I guess my key message for you is we know what those tricky, hard questions are. You've been working in this space. You've been innovating in this space for a long time. The issues of water management, infrastructure management, environmental outcomes, and you've made great progress. I'll just give an example. Just recently, I was talking with a developer and I was actually quite impressed. I guess you might say it was gold-plated developer, but quite impressed looking at the first time they've shown us planners a design and freshwater bodies are protected. There's margins with plantings, key overland flow paths are provided for, connected waterways are there. There's a new wetland at the bottom of the development. There's amenity factored into it. It seems like quite an integrated design. I'm looking at it going, this is quite good from my perspective. I don't think that was just benevolence. I think that's come from their learnings through previous processes with advice from people like yourselves that know what good practice looks like, with policy and regulatory parameters that are requiring them to think about those things, and perhaps some discerning buyers in this case that want amenity and that want that connectivity and that green space and so forth. And so hopefully, while this reform can make some of those planning processes simpler and more straightforward, we don't go backwards on that. And I guess I'm saying hold yourselves to account. You know what's good. Keep advocating for that long-term future. And in the reforms, we're going to see the devil is in the detail. The hard stuff's going to remain quite tricky, as we've mentioned. And the details really matter. And I think the average person that's not working in this space would struggle to get across and understand those details. You work in this space, policy planners work in this space, you're dealing under the RMA all the time. And I would encourage that we look for, we've been told stop saying no but and start saying yes and. So yes and integration, yes growth and development and environment, the commons. Yes, and future generations in upholding te tiriti and communities. Efficient and effective. And you have much to offer to this, because you can say how this might land. When you see things in legislation or policy or standards, you can give practical examples about how this might land, intended or unintended, good or bad. You can say, how would we implement this? What would we need to implement this? Will it work? And I think that's where your strengths come to the fore for freshwater management in New Zealand and broadly in resource management. So we're not going to, if things go according to the timelines that are being proposed, we're not going to have a lot of time to give feedback. But I think just remember, I guess, that the larger populace that don't have contact with the RMA every day or that aren't working in the detail may not be equipped to give that really practical advice on how will this land that you can. And so it's not necessarily about being positional, it's about will this work? And there's a lot at stake. It's our future generations. We want to be sitting there in our rockers on our porches at the end of our days going, we did what we could for you kids, to our children. There's a lot here in New Zealand that's worth doing that for. So I'll end there. No regrets. Do what you can to land this right for the country. Thanks.